Hey, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'm Dave Cohn from the University of Michigan. I have appointments in both the dental school and in biomedical engineering. I also direct the Michigan-Pittsburgh Weiss Regenerative Medicine Resource Center, which is one of two national resource centers supported by the NIDCR DocTrack program. So I'd like to talk today about my journey, how I got to where I'm at today, some of the programs and teams that I lead, spend some time talking about building teams, through three different lenses: a team within your lab, teams across labs, and large programs, and some lessons learned, do's and don'ts of team building, and hopefully the glitches ironed out. There'll be time for discussion and Q&A. So my journey started probably when I was 5 years old. At that time, I realized I had the phenotype of a professor in that the teacher in kindergarten had a rule. Needed to leave one block of each type in its appropriate cubby space, so you'd remember that the square block went in cubby number 2. And 5-year-old Dave said, "This is a silly rule. I can remember that where the square block goes." So I was bucking the system and looking for an angle at that young age. A couple of years later, I broke my arm playing football, and the X-rays were the coolest thing I had ever seen. But the doctor put a cast on between my thumb and my index finger. This is my thumb, not me. My son is not me. He's as much of a maniac at 8 years old as I was. So the cast, my mother said it looks too tight. He said, "I'm an orthopedic surgeon. It's fine." Next morning, it's all discolored. We go back. The next doctor says, "Yeah, no problem. It's too tight. We'll take it off, put on a new one." So I'm 8 years old and thinking, my mother knows more than the surgeon. The bones were cool, but I don't want to be a surgeon. So got into high school, and a biology teacher said, "Those of you that like biology and like math, think about something called biomedical engineering." And that's the first I ever heard of it, but I applied to be a BME major at Tulane University. And first biomechanics course I had with the late Steve Cowan, we had a supplemental book that's still on my shelf, and I really enjoyed it. It's my first exposure to what we now know as biomimetics. And I impressed Steve Cowan by talking to him about this book that we weren't obligated to read. He said, "Why don't you come work in my lab?" So I worked in his lab, had a couple of Orthopedic Research Society abstracts, and my first paper was in the Journal of Biomechanics in 1985. And that catapulted me to grad school at the University of Pennsylvania. And a couple of things happened there, in addition to getting a great interdisciplinary education and exposure to team building. The first was my first patent, which was ultimately licensed to DePuy. And this was my first exposure to translational research, which has helped me out with the resource center that I now run. And the other thing that happened was I presented some of these papers at the Society for Biomaterials meeting that was chaired by Bob Craig, who at the time was the head of dental materials at Michigan. And he forwarded Paul Duchenne, my PhD advisor, announcements of faculty positions at Michigan. And Paul gave it to me, said, "This is a good position. You should apply." I said, "Michigan? Isn't that like one of those M states in flyover country?" And Paul gave me what I call the life serial talk. "It's a good position. Try it." So I tried it, and 30 some odd years later, I'm still here. So, thank you, Bob, for noticing my talk at the meeting, and thank you, Paul, for pushing me. So my lab, my PhD work was musculoskeletal related. my lab at Michigan took that foundation, and we seek to understand skeletal fragility and skeletal regeneration from both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. And a lot of this, particularly the skeletal regeneration, has a footprint within NIDCR. So this is really multidisciplinary, based on team building within and across labs, and it's produced a large number of trainees who have been exposed to this interdisciplinary and team building nature. So we've had a long list of internal and external collaborators through the years that run the spectrum from clinicians, clinician scientists, life scientists, and engineers, and that's been probably the most rewarding thing, is getting to interact and build teams of people dissimilar to myself. So beyond my lab, I run 3 large regenerative medicine programs at Michigan. All of these are at the interface of dentistry and engineering and life sciences and medicine. The first is our T32, supported by NIDCR, that pools trainees from our oral health science program, biomedical engineering, and our PhD programs in the medical school. And the hallmark of this program is getting the different people in the room and have them talk to one another. The second program I run is the Regenerative Medicine Resource Center, which probably has 100 faculty, staff, external experts, trainees, and we're a national center that supports translational projects in the doc space. The third program is one of the university's biosciences hubs in programmable materials for regenerative medicine. This also has about 100 faculty from all walks of life. So a little bit about the doc track. We've compiled a multidisciplinary team of clinicians, engineers, life scientists, but not just a multidisciplinary team of academicians, people beyond academia, people beyond science that help us with commercialization, help us with navigating the FDA pathway, understanding the market space. So this team building is really critical, but it extends beyond just interdisciplinary academic teams. And by creating these teams of support, we've been able to take technologies and educate and guide the project teams through the translational pipeline, towards FDA approval. So this DocTrack program is about a 10-year program. Our interdisciplinary team, which we've evolved over time, started in 2016 and has gone through different stages. We're currently about halfway through the third stage, and planning for what's going to come next, where we're hopefully gearing to guide projects towards clinical adoption. Again, the main message is team building and not just traditional academic personnel. And the impact of our de-risking, this slide should better be labeled the impact of team building, is that we've taken academic projects and guided them to, almost all of them have their IP in place. About 2/3 have had some form of FDA interaction, if not, a formal filing. And we've been able to wean the teams off of NIH dollars into follow-on funding from other avenues. So I think this is the real impact of the team building. So what I want to talk about next is things to think about in terms of team building, and it starts with how to allocate your time, especially for people starting their careers in research. So a typical portfolio would be research, teaching, service, and for a clinician scientist, you might add a 4th prong to this stool. So the absolute best advice I was given when I started is 50% of your effort should be developing your lab, your research niche, Another 25 should be collaborative, outside of your niche, and the last 25 should be teaching, service, clinical care. Problems arise, this stool falls down when this split gets out of whack. Someone that has too much teaching, too much clinical care, or collaboration is great, but too much collaboration at the expense of solidifying the core of your lab can be problematic as well. Okay. So in terms of building the team in your lab, it starts with your vision of what you want your research to be known for, and then ensuring that you have the time, the resources, the space, and the people that can enable you to execute that vision. So some philosophical thoughts for you are, how big do I want my lab? And what's the phenotype of the personnel? Do I want graduate students? Do I want postdocs? Do I want lab staff? What's the best phenotype that's going to excite you from a training standpoint, and it's going to enable you to execute your vision? And whatever the phenotype is, understanding the cost. Even on the NIH's T32s, there's a cap on tuition and stipend. The balance has to come from non-federal sources in your lab or in your university. So build your lab, solidify your vision, solidify that 50% or that leg of the stool. Now, let's talk now about expanding even larger, building teams across labs. It starts with the idea, then what expertise is needed, and let's build the team to provide the expertise that can fulfill the idea that we're thinking about. A strong biosketch doesn't necessarily equate to a strong collaborator. You want people you can work with, and I'll expand on that in a bit. Okay. So here, collaborations can take a couple of forms. If you are leading the team across the different labs, then you can put it in this 50% of the pie. If you are participating in someone else's vision, that's great. You'll get great papers, great collaborations out of that, but view that as part of another 25% of your pie. Too many collaborations will bleed that 25%, enlarge it, and likely compromise your ability to develop your lab, which is what your promotion is ultimately going to be based on. Okay. Now, developing team science for bigger things. I would say whether you're leading the large team or just a participant, it should still come from this collaborative 25%. You don't want to compromise your core. The T32 I run, I'm not going to run it forever. The DocTrack program may have a finite life. All those things may end someday. I need a lab to go back to. So all the large team stuff should come from this other sector of the pie, in my opinion. Don't try to do big things too early. I'll use the analogy of Kentucky basketball, which made the concept of one and done famous in basketball circles. There is a long history in dentistry of one and done. Someone getting a grant, and either they being anointed or they striving for some type of administrative position, some type of big position when the lab wasn't solidified, and those positions are transient. They may have lost the ability to go back and have a lab to go back to, which meant their career essentially plateaued off. Okay, so the message is evolve into doing bigger and better things. Don't let it compromise your own personal research space. Okay. Some years ago, I was on a search committee, and a search committee for a dean, and the provost was talking, and I asked him, well, what are you looking for? and he said, I'm looking for someone I could work with. And I said, does this mean you want somebody that's going to kiss up to you? He gave me a nasty look. And over time, I thought about it. And as I've started to lead large teams, I realized he was right. You want someone that you can work with, not someone whose ego is too big and someone that's not going to listen. So you want your team, whether in your lab, across labs, or large programs, to be rowing in the same direction, which means that it has to be a group of rowers that you can work with and talk to and correct if necessary. I think Einstein said it best, is that ego is inversely proportional to knowledge. A good leader wants to be the dumbest person in the room. If you're asked to be on a team and the team leader has to be the smartest person in the room, I would think twice about that. You want people to check their egos at the door and think of the team. There is no I in team. And lastly, to be a high-powered NIH investigator, it does take a degree of selfishness. Leadership is more about self-sacrifice. So at some point, the lines have to cross. You have to find a certain happy medium between the intensity and the desire to be great, but with leadership of self-sacrifice. I think these are things to look for in building a team and leading a team and choosing team members. So a couple of comments about building large programs. Read the RFA, or more generally, communicate with the people putting the program together, and listen and read and understand every line of what's in the RFA in terms of what the Institute is looking for in creating these programs. Second, this is Mutsumi Yoshida, by far the best person I hired in 33 years at Michigan. Get yourself great staff people, program managers, to take the burden off of you, who are going to have ownership and be really committed, whether it's a large scientific program or even a training grant. The part I write for a training grant for the progress report is small. The pages and pages of tables that our staff do is really the yeoman's work. If that's not in place, it's going to fall on your shoulders. Third, negotiate. If your university wants you to do bigger and badder things, then don't be afraid to ask for some type of compensation in the form of teaching relief, clinical relief, lab personnel, something to take the burden off of your effort. So with that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the programs I run, but more generally, some understanding of what it takes to build and lead a team. So my advice and lessons learned over the years is develop your lab and your lab team first. Make sure that your labs has an identifiable niche. Allocate your time where in your first 5 years, most of your effort goes into evolving your lab. Let the goals define the team and choose the members appropriately. Collaborations are great. No one is an island, but don't take your eye off the ball and what's really important in terms of your lab's research and in terms of running other programs, in terms of building your team, and let yourself evolve into larger roles. Prematurely evolving into larger roles can have an impact on your lab and could flatline your progression. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm happy to answer questions either now or after Michelle's talk, and appreciate the opportunity to speak today.
Go ahead and hear Michelle and then take questions. So we make sure we have time for both. But that was terrific. You can always enter questions in chat too, I think.
Please do.
Great. Let's go to share the screen. All right, can you see my screen okay? I'll guess is all right, right? Okay, cool. Thank you, Dave. It was really a great introduction about team science. I actually learned a lot. Thank you, Dave. That was great. Sorry, just okay. So I would just give a little bit of a bigger picture point about the team science and how that can really galvanize and catalyze research collaboration. So my name is Michel Koo. I am a professor at the School of Dental Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm also a co-founder of a Center for Innovation, uniting the School of Dental Medicine and the School of Engineering, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about that today. But before that, I just want to share a little bit of my my background. So my academic journey, I'm a dentist at heart, but I was trained in different disciplines, and my academic journey started with food engineering, which was a very kind of eye-opening training for me. Really broadened the scope of my research, brought up new concepts, new approaches, new ideas, and that was followed by a PhD and postdoctoral training in microbiology and cell biology, and finally, in the later years of my career, in nanoengineering, particularly in nanotechnology. So engineering has been really part of my kind of my academic life cycle, and really helped to build up this background in bridging engineering to dental medicine. So and today my focus will be in this union, how uniting dental medicine and engineering can help really transform, advance, oral and craniofacial health sciences. So during this academic journey, from different trainings, I obviously met many great mentors who really influenced my career and my way of thinking, my vision, and but more importantly, all of them, they had one singular advice that I should embrace multidisciplinarity, really at heart, and of integrating different disciplines, which comes with I think many benefits, right? It really helps you to expand your scientific horizons. Starting to bring new approaches, new methodologies, and along the way, really making new friends in different areas that can help you, to elevate your research. And more importantly, I think in many ways, help to publish, I think, interesting papers, interesting work. And when somebody asks me, what are your top papers you ever published, and what are your top 3 papers? I always tell them, my top papers always involves, collaborations between different disciplines. For example, when we combine microbiology and computational sciences, really help us to understand how these polymicrobial communities in oral cavity organize spatially, and how these influence the interactions between them, and how they colonize dental surfaces, and ultimately how it causes diseases. Combining cell biology and physics really, I think, help us to understand during my postdoctoral training, on understanding how intracellular pressure can actually govern cell motility in the complex 3-dimensional cell cellular matrix. And finally, combining nanotechnology and robotics, it allowed us to create the very first antimicrobial robots that could be used for biofilm eradication in different surfaces. And even these 3 different studies that seemingly seems to be not connected. It actually helped me to apply each of the different concepts that I learned during each of these projects to apply to each other studies. So, and really galvanize the importance of bringing different disciplines to try to tackle a scientific question, right? And more importantly, I think engaging multidisciplinarity means that you cannot do it alone, right? It really is a team science effort. So those two cannot be separated. It really kind of shows the importance of not only working together, but also working with different groups that help to address a specific question, a specific challenge that you want to ask. And that team science really brings a lot of benefits, right? It brings a multitude of different perspectives, right? And that's important because it brings new ideas, different knowledge, different background, which help you to start to think out of the box, right? And is also very synergistic because it brings complementary expertise from different fields, bringing different tools, different methodologies, but also different concepts. And in my view also is very humanistic because it helps to build a sense of community because you're collaborating with other researchers in other areas of expertise. And along the way, I think you end up making a lot of new colleagues and friends that will help you to build your science and also advance, new ideas and new concepts. So in many ways, those three different elements are really the driving force of our Center for Innovation that my dear friend Kate Stebbe and I co-founded a couple of years ago to bring together dentists, scientists, and engineers to really together advance oral health and craniofacial health and the different challenges we face in this area. So over the years, we built a really a great community of over now 30 faculties from both schools, again, with different backgrounds, with different knowledges, different perspectives that help. It's what we do. We try to help to connect them and with others across the university and bringing them resources to promote not only fundamental discoveries in basic sciences, but also help develop solutions, desperate needed solutions to address the unmet needs in oral and craniofacial health through three major pillars: research, training, and entrepreneurship. And I think entrepreneurship is very important. It can help to disrupt and advance, the current ways of doing things, to study, to develop therapies. And that's an area that we are also trying to emphasize in our center. And what we do, we try to bridge engineering, material, and computational sciences with dental medicine in two major areas. One is to study oral diseases, mechanisms, and craniofacial disorders, including oral cancer. And at the same time, as a team effort, try to develop affordable therapies and low-cost devices, which I think is very important. That's one important challenge we try to put together in our center, that whatever we create needs to be affordable, needs to be low cost, so it can be applicable and used by everyone. And obviously precision diagnostics, which has been something that has been trying to be developed over the years, but I think with engineering approaches that has been developed, I think it can really create very feasible opportunities to come up with diagnostic devices. So, and in addition to having this community of faculty members across the schools, we also are very excited to work with NIDCR, and we're very thankful for their support in addition to Colgate, to train the next generation of dentists and engineers to work together. And we now have this incredibly diverse group of really amazing young talents that are bringing their different backgrounds, from clinicians, material scientists, to bioengineers, and now we have 2 entrepreneurs in this group. And I think will hopefully help us to disrupt the current state of innovation in oral-craniofacial health. So what we are hoping is that over the years, we'll be able to create this new workforce where working at the interface of the disciplines is not something unique, but actually a norm. That they will be feeling very comfortable working with each other in terms of addressing and working together to tackle big questions and challenges. So what we are doing is bringing together faculty, mentors, and trainees to leverage all these engineering technologies and engineering approaches to advance oral health innovations. And I think this is really a great time to be at this interface, especially with rapidly evolving engineering computational technologies that are allowing us to come up with not only feasible, but also realistic, approaches for therapies, diagnostics, and prevention of diseases. And if I ask the question, who will benefit the most from these advancements, I think is definitely the trainees, right? The next generation scientists, because I think this is really a great time to be at the interface of disciplines. I think where we have all this, emerging technologies that are becoming feasible, available to everyone. We are in this period where all these different disciplines are colliding into a single niche. Right? Everybody are coming together in terms of developing approaches. So I think for the future scientists, this cannot be. This is just one of the best times to be a scientist, to take advantage of these opportunities to bring different disciplines. And I can give some examples that they're happening currently at our center. So we have, for example, Yuan Lu, who is a very bright clinician scientist who is working with this really low-cost anti-caries nanoparticles that can be tailored for children with iron deficiency, which also happens to be more prone to dental caries. It's a very neat technology using iron oxide nanoparticles that can specifically target pathogens without killing commensal microorganisms, which provide a very targeted, very precise way to prevent dental caries without disturbing the normal microbiota. And we have, and she was recently awarded a Women's Science Award for distinguished research, and we are very excited about her. She was just getting a new position, a new faculty position, so she could, move forward with her career and hopefully bring more impact to the field, especially in early childhood caries. We also have Marshall Padilla, who is part of the Mind the Future, which is a great program at AAD-OCR. I think there's a session tomorrow. I encourage you to attend and to learn more about the Mind the Future, which is really, expanding and creating this very diverse workforce with different backgrounds and different disciplines to help advance the oral-craniofacial research. And Marshall is one of them. He's a bioengineer who got very interested in applying his knowledge in the field of oral-craniofacial research. In particular, I think he's working with something very exciting. He's working with lipid nanoparticles and mRNA technology. As you know, Drew Weissman and Kathleen Carrico was awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine this year. And now Marshall is applying the same technology to treat craniofacial disorders and oral cancers. And I'm very excited about the work that he's doing. I think he's going to pose a lot of impact in terms of developing new therapies using mRNA and lipid nanoparticle approaches. And finally, we have Zi Ren, who is a dentist scientist with a strong background in microbiology. who discovered this very interesting bacterial fungal assemblages in human saliva of diseased patients. And what he found that these bacterial fungal assemblages, once they colonize the tooth surface, it behaves very, very strangely. It does show this incredible group level surface mobility that has not been observed before in the field of microbiology, right? That almost resembling a higher organism, like invertebrates, kind of jumping from one way to another. Really, really interesting, really novel mechanism of surface mobility that caught attention not only in the dental field, but also in the field of microbiology at large. And also got the attention of Scientific American, which wrote a very nice article about Aziz's discovery. So again, really bringing together different disciplines really help to kind of create new discoveries, new potential applications for therapies and also diagnostics. And I will just end with this, the last story here, with what happened when we put together a roboticist with a dentist and chemical engineers. And they start to put them on the same table, start to converse and start to collaborate. And what they come up with is developing micro robots against biofilm infections. And here you see they're able to create a very miniature sized robots that can fit inside the root canal, which can be applied to treat not only the biofilms, but also help to regenerate tissues at the apical region. And seeing is believing. And here I show you this video of these micro robots moving inside the tooth canal. And as you can imagine, these micro robots can carry drugs that can be precisely positioned at the apical area where all the infections are occurring. You can imagine the possibilities of this precise therapy using these micro robots. And this is something that will be considered a science fiction not long ago. But again, when you put together different minds, different research with different background, different knowledge, really you can come up with great concepts, great ideas to potentially change the way we do things today. And recently, this technology has moved even forward, where we're able to actually track these microsite robots using a mini-pig model. So here, using, again, equipments that are available in the clinic, so the CBCT, we can place these micro robots at the pulpal cavity area, and we can guide them and control their positioning to be all the way down to the apical region where how the infection is occurring. So again, something that would not be possible if you are in a siloed research, right? I mean, you need to be communicating, interacting with other disciplines, be able to come up with something that could be disruptive in the future. Okay, so going back to the first slide, that multidisciplinarity is really truly a team science. You cannot do it alone. And I think, being able to be engaged in the multidisciplinary research really bring the best of you, right? It really help you to not only collaborate, but also how to, challenge yourself for bigger achievements, right? For bigger ideas and resolving and bringing research to a much higher impact. And I'll end this point about the team science approach, the importance of the team science approach, by quoting three very important persons that are from completely different backgrounds. One from a poet and a writer. When he wrote, he quote, "Individually, we are one drop, but together we are an ocean." So really kind of simple quote, but very profound, how together we can be a much bigger force, right? And Another quote from a very famous coach. This is a quote that has been been used in sports, but also applies in team science, which the strength of the team is each individual member, and the strength of each member is the team. It cannot be more true, in the perspective of team science. And finally, our favorite evolutionary biologist: those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. And that, I think, is true today, especially with all these different disciplines, coming and colliding to create new approaches to study, diagnose, and treat diseases. So I think there's really a wonderful opportunity, especially for the trainees, to become a scientist, to be at the medium where all the different disciplines are coming together. So with that, I hopefully was able to get your interest in the possibility of using different disciplines to tackle challenging aspects of science, both in terms of disease mechanisms and also therapies and diagnostics. And if you want to learn a little more about the things we are doing in our center, in our training program, please use the QR code here. And I also invite you to take a look, a recent perspective article that we put together in JDR, where we describe a little bit more in detail how we are bringing together dental medicine engineering to advance oral health innovations. And there's the QR code. Just hopefully you can check it out. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Looks great. Yeah, it looks great. Thank you both. Are there any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can
Go ahead.
can everyone hear me? Great. So I really enjoyed both talks, and I noticed there's a discussion about entrepreneurs being on the team. And I was wondering if you could expand a little bit about some of their roles and what some of the roadblocks may be later on in getting the technology commercialized, and what do you think funding agencies can do to kind of facilitate those discussions and better leverage entrepreneurs?
Right. Thank you, Christopher. That's an important point. Well, first of all, I think entrepreneurs are very important to disrupt, the current way of doing things. And I think if you look at in biotech, for example, we have entrepreneurs, popping up almost every day. But in the dental medicine, still we are a little bit slow. To me, that's important to be a little bit more active in this area, because entrepreneurs bring a little bit more of that, we need to do this now type of thing, right? And their mindset is a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more trying to disrupt the market as soon as possible. And I think we missed that, and I'm trying to encourage more people to apply for entrepreneurship. So I think there are many different ways to do. I know NIH and NIDCR, they have specific programs where you can, spin off your ideas, your research into companies to develop your ideas. But I think we can also do by bringing together venture capitalists who might be interested in your idea. So that's what we are trying to do in our center. We bring venture capitalists. We also bring investors who might be interested in something that could be potentially disruptive. So I think there are both ways. You have the NIH and NIDCR route, but also you can have the kind of the private funding route, and that's something that we are trying to we are exploiting to facilitate that process.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it starts with education, and as the unsustainable market of PhDs finding academic positions has become a reality, and such a smaller percentage of graduate students are getting academic positions than 10, certainly 20 years ago, then culture of, I hate the term, I'll put it in air quotes, alternative careers has evolved. And a chunk of that is teaching entrepreneurship. So I think it starts with education because it's a very different approach that's needed, a very different type of research. And it's really the motivation behind the NIDCR's DocTrack program. They assess the 15, 20-year R01 portfolio in tissue engineering, and most of the R01s delivered on their specific aims, but they were largely academic aims that produced papers, produced trainees, but didn't move the needle in terms of translation, either to the clinic or through an entrepreneurial mechanism to the private sector. So that was a big motivation. There's certainly the SBIR programs. Many NIH institutes have entrepreneurs in residence to help guide investigators. But I think the key is understanding what entrepreneurism is, what translation is, because it's a very different hat. And it takes a commitment and more than just sticking your toe in the water. But I think most universities have some type of educational program and to facilitate technology. Certainly the tech transfer offices can probably provide guidance on that.